Alright, hey guys, what's going on? It's another Murderous Monday. And and this time we're gonna be doing a holiday special. Um and I upload every Monday, or try to upload every Monday, hence the name. And the next and the next video that I will be doing, this isn't a serial killer episode that we know of. This is the infamous mystery of the 1945 Christmas Eve house fire that 5 out of the 9 kids were never found. The Sodder family mystery. The Sodder children disappearance. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945. Oh, wait, I'm also going to do it like a narrator. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder residence in Fayetteville, West Virginia, United States. At the time, it was occupied by George Sodder, his wife Jenny, and their 9 of their 10 children. Oh, so they originally had 10 children. During the fire, George, Jenny, and 4 of the 9 children that were there that night escaped. The bodies of the other 5 children have never been found. The surviving Sodder family believed for the rest of their lives that the 5 missing children survived. The Sodders never rebuilt the house, instead converting the site into a memorial garden to the lost children. In the 1950s, as they came to doubt that their children had perished, the family put up a billboard at the site along State Route 16 with pictures of the 5 offering a reward of information that would bring closure to the case. The remaining standing until shortly after Jenny Sodder's death in 1989. In support of their belief that the children survived, the Sodders had pointed to a number of unusual circumstances before and during the fire. George disputed the Fayetteville Fire Department's findings that the blaze was electrical in origin, noting that he had recently had the house rewired and inspected. George and his wife suspected arson, leading to the theories that the children had been taken by the Sicilian mafia, perhaps in a retaliation for George's outspoken criticism of the fascist government of his native Italy. State and federal efforts to investigate the case further in the early 1950s yielded no new information. The family did, however, later receive what may have been a picture of one of the boys as an adult during the 1960s. Their last surviving daughter, Sylvia, along with their grandchildren, continued to publicize the case in the 21st century in the media and online. Now, background. George Sodder was born with the name Giorgio Sadu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the United States 13 years later with an older brother who went back home as soon as both boys had cleared customs at Ellis Island. For the rest of his life, George, as he came to be known, would not talk much about why he had left his homeland. Sodder eventually found work on the railroads in Pennsylvania, carrying water and other supplies to workers. After A few years he took more permanent work as a driver in Smithers, West Virginia. He then started his own trucking company, initially hauling fill dirt to construction sites and later hauling coal mined in the region. Jenny Cipriani, who is now Jenny Sodder, a storekeeper's daughter in Smithers, who also had immigrated from Italy to her in her childhood, married George in 1922. The Sodders settled outside nearby Fayetteville, which had a large population of Italian immigrants, in a 2-story timber frame house 2 miles north of town. In 1923, they had the first of their 10 children. George's business prospered, and they became one of the most respected middle-class families around, in the words of one of the local official. However, George had strong opinions about many subjects and was not shy about expressing them, sometimes alienating people. In particular, his strident opposition to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini had led to some strong arguments with other members of the immigrant community. The last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1942. By then, their second oldest son, Joe, so Joe survived, because Joe had left home to serve in the military during the Second World War. The following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George's criticism of the late dictator had left some hard feelings. In October 1945, a visiting life insurance salesman, after being rebuffed, warned George that his house would go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. That's what a salesman said, attributing this all to the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. So they probably had something to do with it, the salesman. Another visitor to the house, ostensibly seeking work, took the occasion to go around to the back and warn George that a pair of fuse boxes would cause fire someday. George was puzzled by the observation, since he had just had the house rewired when an electric stove was installed, and the local electric company had said afterwards it was safe. In the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older sons had noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through town, its occupants watching the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. So you think that all the immigrants that didn't like them probably killed them? Probably. All the 5 other ones. Christmas Eve, 1945 house fire. The Sodder family celebrated on Christmas Eve, 1945. Marion, age 19, the oldest daughter, had been working at a dime store in downtown Fayetteville. And she surprised 3 of her younger sisters, Martha, 12, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, with new toys that she had bought for them as gifts. The younger children were so excited that They asked their mother if they could stay up past what would have been their usual bedtime at 10 p.m. Well, at 10 p.m., Jenny told them that they could stay up a little later as long as the two oldest boys were still awake. 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old brother Louis remembered to put the cows in and feed the chickens before going to bed themselves. George and the two oldest boys, John, 22, and George Jr., 16, who had spent the day working with their father, were already asleep. After reminding the children of those remaining chores, she took Sylvia, 3 years old, upstairs with her, and they went to bed together. The telephone rang at 12:30 a.m. Jenny awoke and went downstairs to answer it. The caller was a woman whose voice she did not recognize, asking for a name she was not familiar with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Jenny told the caller she had reached the wrong number, later recalling the woman's weird laugh. She hung up and returned to bed. Do they think that she probably had something to do with it too? As she did, she noticed. She hung up and returned to bed. As she did, she noticed that the lights were still on and the curtains were not drawn. Two things the children normally attended to when they stayed up later than their parents. Marion had fallen asleep in the living room couch, so Jenny assumed the other children who had stayed up later had gone back up to the attic where they slept. She closed the bed curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was again awakened by the sound of an object hitting the house's roof. And it wasn't Santa. And it was with a loud bang and then a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep. After another half hour, she woke up again smelling smoke. I think I know what that was. People probably went up to the roof and planted a bomb for 30 minutes or however long it said. When she got up again, she found that the room George used for his office was on fire around the telephone line and fuse box, just like the other people predicted that their house would go up in flames. Jenny woke him, and he in turn woke his older sons, both parents of and 4 of their children. Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr. escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs but heard no response. They could not go up there as the stairway itself was already engulfed in flames. John said in his first police interview after the fire that he went up to the attic to alert his siblings sleeping there, though he later changed his story to say that he only called up there and did not actually see them. Efforts to find aid and rescue the children were unsuspectingly complicated. The phone did not work, so Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department. A driver on the nearby road had also seen the flames and called from a nearby tavern. They, too, were unsuccessful, either because they could not reach the operator or because the phone there turned out to be broken. Either the neighbor or the passing motorist was eventually successful in reaching the fire department from another phone in the center of town. George, barefoot, attempted to climb the house's outside wall and broke open a window, cutting his arm in the process. He and his sons intended to use a ladder to the attic to rescue the other children, but it was not in its usual spot, resting against the house that could not be found nearby. See, so that only suspects more that some people climbed up the ladder, climbed up the roof, and planted a bomb or something. A water barrel that could have been used to extinguish the fire was frozen solid. George then tried to pull both of the trucks he used in his business up to the house and then used to climb them to the attic window. But neither of them would start despite having worked perfectly during the previous day. Frustrated, the 6 Sodders who had escaped had no choice but to watch the house burn down and collapse over the next 45 minutes. They assumed the other 5 children had perished in the blaze. The fire department, low on manpower due to the war and relying on individual firefighters to call each other, did not respond until that later morning. Chief F.J. Morris said the next day that the already slow response was further hampered by his inability to drive the fire truck, requiring that he wait until someone could drive was available. The firefighters, one of whom was a brother of Jenny's, could do little, but looked through the ashes that were left in the Sodders' basement. By 10 a.m., Morris told the Sodders that they had not found any bones, as might have been expected if the other children had been in the house as it burned. You don't think that the heat of the fire could incinerate the bones, like when they cremate people? Because I think so. According to another account, they did find a few bone fragments and internal organs, but chose not to tell the family, which I wouldn't know why. It has also been noted by modern fire professionals that their search was cursory at best. Nevertheless, Morris believed that the 5 children unaccounted for had died in the fire, suggesting it had been hot enough to burn their bodies completely, like I said. Hold on, let me just... Aftermath. Hold on a second. How much? Oh, wow, there's a lot more. Alright. Aftermath. Morris told George to leave the site undisturbed so that the state fire marshal's office could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, after 4 days, George and his wife could not bear the site anymore, so he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting it into a memorial garden for the lost children. The lost coroner convened an inquest the next day, which held that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring, even though even though that George just put new wires up before the fire. Among the jurors was the man who had threatened George and that his house would be burned down and his children destroyed, in the retribution for his anti-Mussolini remarks. Death certificates for the 5 children were issued on December 30th. The local newspaper contradicted itself, stating that all the bodies had been found, but then later in the same story reporting that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny were too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2nd, 1946, but their surviving children did. Alright. I don't think so, but, there's a little hunch that, remember, John Sodder, he just came back from the military, right? I don't know if this could actually be possible, but he might, because he knew people in the military. Maybe he planned the murders and the house fire. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. You can do what you will, but I think maybe John Sodder has something to do with it now, because he knows a lot of people, a lot of higher up people, maybe to take out his family. Again, I don't know, but yeah. Family. Alright, now, family questioned about the official account. Family questions about the official account. That's the next chapter of this story. Not long afterward, as they begun to rebuild their lives, the Sodder family started to question all the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if it had been caused by an electrical problem, the family's Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages when the power should have gone out. Then they found the ladder that had been missing from the side of the house on the night of the fire at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away. So we can all agree that Jenny heard the perpetrators on the roof, right? That it was a faulty wiring. They probably planted a bomb or something. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away from it to do so. And also, who would have the ability and the agility and strength to climb up a pole? John Sodder, because he was in the military. I don't know. I'm just leaning towards John Sodder as something to do with it. I don't know. Willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away from it to do so. A man whom neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claiming he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was the power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. However, no record identifying the suspects exists, and why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder house while stealing the block and tackle has never been explained. Jenny said in 1968 that if he had cut the power line, she and her husband, along with their other 4 children, would never have been able to make it out of the house. Jenny also had trouble accepting Morris's belief that all the traces of the children's bodies had been burned completely in the fire. Remember, remember, they said that they found a few fragments of the bone fragments, but they didn't tell anybody. Many of the household appliances had been found still recognizable in the ash, along with fragments of the tin roof, rusted. She contrasted the results of the fire with a newspaper account of a similar fire that she had read around the same time that killed a family of 7. Skeletal remains of all the victims were reported to have been found in that case. Jenny burned small piles of animal bones to see if they would be completely consumed. None ever were. An employee of a local crematorium she contacted told her that human bones remain even after bodies are burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,090 degrees Celsius for 2 hours, far longer and hotter than any house fire could have been. I wonder, remember they said that they had cows and chickens. I wonder if they survived. Probably not. But I mean, the chickens could just fly. The Sodders' trucks' failure to start was also considered. George believed they had been tampered with, perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. However, one of George's sons-in-law told the Charleston Gazette-Mail in 2013 that he had come to believe that Sodder and his sons might have, in their haste to start the trucks, flooded the engines. Some accounts have suggested the wrong number phone call to the Sodder house might also have somehow been connected to the fire. However, investigations later located the woman who had made the call. She confirmed it had been a wrong number on her part. Subsequent developments. As spring approached, the Sodders, as they had said they would, planted flowers in the soil bulldozed over the house. Jenny tended to it carefully for the rest of her life. However, further developments in early 1946 reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might in fact be alive somewhere. Evidence soon emerged indicating that the house fire had not started in an electrical fault, and instead was set deliberately. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. A few months later, when the snow had melted, Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber ball-like object in the brush nearby that they probably lit on fire. George, recalling his wife's account of a loud thump on the roof before the fire, said it looked like a pineapple bomb. See, I said bomb, right? Hand grenade, or some other incendiary device used in combat. Who was in combat? John Sodder. See, it all makes sense that John Sodder wanted to kill his family. I don't know. Again, I'm just putting it out there. It all adds up. His agility to climb the pole. He has people in the military that he could call up, used in combat, right? The bombs and stuff. He might have had a motive. that he wanted to take out his family. I don't know. Again, in my theory, this is leading towards John Sodder has a part in his family's house fire murder. The family later claimed that, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, the fire had started on the roof, although by then there was no way to prove it. Other witnesses claimed to have seen the missing Sodder children themselves. One woman who had been watching the fire from the road said she had seen some of them peering out of a passing car while the house was burning. Another woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston said she had served them breakfast at the next morning and noted the presence of a cop with Florida license plates at the rest stop's parking lot as well. The Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley from the nearby town of Gawley Bridge to look into the case. Tinsley informed the family that the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Mussolini sentiments had been on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. He also learned of rumors around Fayetteville that, despite his report to the Sodders that no remains had been found in the ashes, Morris had found a heart I guess a real heart, in which he later packed into a small metal box and secretly buried. Morris had apparently confessed to this to a local minister, who in turn confirmed it to George. George and Tinsley went to Morris and confronted him with the news. Morris agreed to show the two where he had buried the metal box, and they dug it up. They took what they found inside the box and to a local funeral director, who, after examining it, told them that in reality, it was just a fresh beef liver that had never been exposed to fire. Later, more rumors circulated around Fayetteville that Morris had afterwards admitted the box with the liver had indeed not come from the fire originally. He had supposedly placed there in hopes that the Sodders would find it and be satisfied that the missing children had indeed died in the fire. Alright, now, 1949 excavation. On one occasion, George saw a magazine photo of a group of young ballet dancers in New York City, one of whom looked like his missing daughter, Betty. He drove all the way to the girls' school, where he repeated demands to see the girl himself were refused. George also tried to interest the FBI in investigating what he considered a kidnapping. FBI director, which we've heard of before, I think we've heard of on this channel before, J. Edgar Hoover, personally responded to these letters. Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. If the local authorities requested the bureau's assistance, excuse me, he added, he would of course direct agents to assist, but the Fayetteville police and fire departments declined to do so. In August 1949, George was able to persuade Oscar Hunter, a Washington, D.C. pathologist, to supervise a new search through the dirt of the dirt at the house site. After a very thorough search, artifacts including a dictionary that had belonged to the children and some coins were found. Several small bone fragments were unearthed, determined to have been a human vertebrae, which brings more speculation that they died in the fire. The bone fragments were sent to Marshall T. Newman, a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution. They were confirmed to be lumbar vertebrae, all from the same person. Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death should have been 16 or 17 years old, Newman's report said. The top limit of age should be about 22, since the centra, which normally fuse at 23, are still unfused. Thus, given the age range, it was not very likely that these bones were from any of the 5 missing children, since the oldest, Maurice, had been 14 at the time. Although the report allowed that vertebrae of a boy his age sometimes were advanced enough to appear to be at a lower end of the range. Newman added that the bone showed no signs of exposure to flame. Further, he agreed that it was very strange that those bones were the only ones found, since a wood fire of such short duration should have left full skeletons of all the children behind. The report concluded that the vertebrae had instead most likely come from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze the site. Later, Tinsley supposedly confirmed that the bone fragments had come from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope, but could not explain why they had been taken from there or how they came to be at the fire site. The Smithsonian returned the bone fragments excuse me, to George in September 1949, according to its records. Their current location is unknown. The investigation and its findings attracted national attention, and the West Virginia legislature held 2 hearings on the case in 1950. Afterwards, however, Governor Okie L. Patson and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett told the Sodders the case was hopeless and closed it at the state level. The FBI decided it had jurisdiction as a possible interstate kidnapping, but dropped the case after 2 years of following fruitless leads. Alright, continuing family investigation. With the end of official efforts to resolve the case, the Sodder family did not give up hope. They had flyers printed up with pictures of the children offering a $5,000 reward, soon doubled, for information that would have been settled the case for even one of them. It's probably like $20,000, $25,000 now. In 1952, they put up a billboard at the site of the house and another along U.S. Route 60 near Ansted with the same information. It would in time become a landmark for traffic through Fayetteville on U.S. Route 59 on U.S. Route 19. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said 59. On U.S. Route 19. Today, State Route 16. The family efforts soon brought another reported sighting of the children after the fire. Ida Crutchfield, a woman who ran a Charleston, West Virginia hotel, claimed to have seen the children approximately a week afterwards. She said, "I do not remember the exact date," she said in a statement. The children had come around midnight with 2 men and 2 women, all of whom appeared to her to be of Italian extraction. When she attempted to speak with the children, one of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. She recalled that they left the hotel early the next morning. Investigators today do not, however, consider her story credible, as she had only first seen photos of the children 2 years after the fire, 5 years before she came forward. George followed up leads in person, traveling to the areas from where tips had come from. A woman from St. Louis, Missouri, claimed Martha was being held in a convent there. A bar patron in Texas claimed to have overheard 2 people making incriminating statements about a fire that happened on Christmas Eve in West Virginia some years before. Excuse me. None of those proved significant, though. When George heard later that a relative of Jenny's in Florida had children that looked similar to his, the relative had to prove the children was his own before George was satisfied. In 1967, George went to the Houston area to investigate another tip. A woman there had written to the family saying that Lewis had revealed his true identity to her one night after having too much to drink. She believed that he and Maurice were both living in Texas somewhere. However, George and his son-in-law, Grover Paxton, were unable to speak with her. Police there were able to help them find the 2 women she indicated, but they later denied being the missing sons. Paxton said years later that doubts about that denial lingered in George's mind for the rest of his life. A photograph received by the family in 1967 believed by them to be an adult Lewis. Another letter that they received that year brought the Sodders what they believed was the most credible evidence that at least Lewis was still alive. One day, Jenny found in the mail a letter addressed to her, postmarked in Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a picture of a young man of around 30, with features strongly resembling Lewis's, who would have been in his 30s if he had survived. On the back was written, "Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys A90132 or 35. I don't know what that means. Probably the address. The family hired another private detective to go to Central City and look into the missive, but he never reported back to the Sodders, as they were unable to locate him afterwards. The picture, nonetheless, gave them hope. They added it to the billboard, leaving Central City out of it and any other published information out of fear that Lewis might come to harm, and put an enlargement of it over the fireplace. George admitted that the Charleston Gazette-Mail later the next year that the lack of information had been like hitting a rock wall. We can't go any further. He nevertheless vowed to continue. He said, "Time is running out for us." He admitted in another interview around that time, but we only want to know, If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them. George Sodder died in 1969. Jenny and her surviving children, except John, who never talked about the night of the fire. Except John, one of the main suspects there, I think, who never talked about the night of the fire, except to say that the family should accept what happened and move on with their lives. Continue to seek answers to their questions about the missing children's fate. Alright, now we have more suspicion that John Sodder has something to do with it. Because, right, he has military friends that could do bombing, and there was a bomb that was found on the roof. Number one. Two, he climbed up a 14-foot pole, and with agility and the ability for him to do that and the strength, this might be a coincidence, but I think it could only be someone from the military, because you know they're strong. They have what it takes to climb up a pole and stuff and do a lot of stuff. And now we found out that John Sodder doesn't want to talk anything about the fire, except that they should accept it and move on with their lives. So another reason why I suspect that John Sodder is one of the masterminds behind this. Alright, where do we go now? After George's death, Jenny stayed in the family home, putting up fencing around it and adding additional rooms. For the rest of her life, she wore black in mourning and tended the garden at the site of the former house. After her death, in 1989, the family finally took the weather-worn billboard down. Their surviving Sodder children, joined by their own children, continued to publicize the case and investigate leads. They, along with older Fayetteville residents, had theorized that the Sicilian Mafia was trying to extort money from George, and the children may have been taken by someone who knew about the planned arson and said they would be safe if they left the house. They were possibly taken back to Italy if the children had survived all those years and were aware that the parents and siblings had survived too. The family believes that they may have avoided contact in order to keep them from harm. Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the youngest of the surviving Sodder siblings, died in 2021. She was in the house on the night of the fire, which she said was her earliest memory. She said, "I was the last one of the kids to leave home," she recalled to the Gazette Mail in 2013. She and her father often stayed up late talking about what might have happened. "I experienced their grief for a long time." She believed that her siblings survived that night and assisted with efforts to find them and publicize the case. Her daughter said in 2006, "She promised my grandparents she wouldn't let the story die, that she would do everything she could." In the 21st century, the family's efforts have come to include online forums like websleuths.com in addition to media coverage. The increase in the latter has led some who have examined the case to believe that the children did in fact die in 1945. George Bragg, a local author who wrote about this case in 2012 book West Virginia's Unsolved Murders, believed that John was telling the truth in his original account when he said he he tried to physically awaken his siblings before fleeing the house. He allows that that conclusion may still not be correct. Logic tells you that they probably did burn up in the fire, but you can't always go by logic. Stacey Horn, who did a segment on the case for National Public Radio around its 60th anniversary in 2005, also believes the children's death in the fire is the most plausible solution. In a contemporaneous post on her blog with material she had to cut from her story for a time, she noted that the fire had continued to smolder all night after the house collapsed, and that 2 hours was not enough time to search the ash thoroughly. Even if it had been, the firefighters may not have known what to look for. However, she said, there is enough genuine weirdness about this whole thing that if someday it is learned that the children did not die in the fire, I won't be shocked. Alright. Again, like always, what do you think about this case? Now we got more information, right? Right. See, I think John Sodder played a... I'm going to say this... I know I say this a lot in this video. I think John Sodder had a part in this video, right? He was in the military, right? He was in the military. He knew people from the military. They had military bombs on the roof. What else? I won't even say that he was the one that climbed the 14-foot pole, because I feel like any agile person could do that. But when he said that to just accept it and move on, that's where it hit the nail in the coffin, which maybe he did have something to do with it. And now it's saying that he said that John tried to wake up the siblings, which I highly doubt. And another conclusion about him having something to do with it is that he was one of the surviving children. And so he probably knew what was going to happen. And he said, okay, I probably should get out of here before I die. See, I full-heartedly think he has something to do with it. At first, I was like, maybe. But now I'm thinking, yeah. Yeah, it leads up to this. Alright. Before I click off this video, a hint for next video. I think it was around the same time, maybe a little bit earlier, I think like the 1920s or 30s. This guy was known as the Alligator Man. He fed his victims to alligators, just like Robert Pickton had fed his victims to the pigs. And if you guys know who I'm talking about, please put it down in the comments below. I know that you guys have stayed here for almost an hour. If you have, I appreciate it. I thank you very much. Happy holidays. It's in 2 days. It's the... Wait, hold on. It's the 79th anniversary of the Sodder's family house fire tomorrow into Christmas. So, just keep them in your prayers. I keep them in my prayers. That hopefully they did escape. And yeah. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.